Paul again, and today I'm going to continue talking more about esoteric science. And just as an introduction, in case people haven't seen my videos, I have been a student of esoteric teachings for a really long time, and I started meditating in my early 20s. And along the way, I've learned a lot of things, and I've practiced internal techniques, and I go through a lot of different books of some of my other videos, and I talk a lot about perception. And in the series about the so-called esoteric science, I mentioned that the sages of the past and current sages and so on, they teach us that essentially there's a thread of consciousness that goes all the way through all the different phases of matter, all the way to the root consciousness, of which all consciousness is. And the sages say, well, there's that, that ultimate unspeakable pool, whatever, however you conceive it, of infinity, and that consciousness goes all the way through the atomic structure, through the whole universe. Basically, that's how omnipresence is, if you want to get into this cosmic thing. Now, there's a science behind the science of God, you might say, the science of the soul, the science of awareness, of how to link the thread of consciousness all the way from the root, from the God level, all the way down through a conscious operating human being. And this is what people talk about, the avatars and the great sages, or the God man and women, or the enlightened souls, or the masters, or this or that. There are ways to harness and basically not do anything. And essentially, Buddha said, let go and just be nothing, and then you'll start floating into that infinity. But the point is that there's a science to knowing who we are, because consciousness is a factor. It's an indisputable factor. If we're even able to ask the question of what is God, then it must mean that we have a consciousness of some kind, and we have an element in us that arises to ask a question like that. So basically, the esoteric psychology talks about how to build a bridge from the conscious mind of a human being. In this particular, we're just humans here, we got to use this body, and there are physiology aspects of our physiology, our brain, and everything integrated together in this particular form, has the ability to connect a thread all the way from the very, very subtle to living in this physical world. The whole point of so-called God-man is that if you have a human body, you have the God body, you might say, in a manner of speaking. You have the ability, you have the physiology and the technology to have a link to that almighty essence of which we are just a spark of. And instead of just being a theoretical idea, hey, it's nice to say, well, I'm a spark of the almighty and so on, but the sages say, well, look, there's techniques, there's the third eye, and that there's techniques of meditation that'll make you won't be in any doubt of what kind of an experience you have, because it's a knowledge, it's a direct experience. Because essentially, when people ask the consciousness question, scientists, there's people who say, well, don't believe in anything. There are people like that. We have this brain, and it's all like a bunch of neurons, and da 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 da, yada yada yada, and that's it. There's nothing more to that. But again, it's sort of like the old story of a frog. Two frogs met, and one lived in a well and one lived in a pond, and they went back to the frog with the well and said, well, that's a pretty small little place you got there. And they went to the pond, and the frog that lived in the well said, well, this is a little different. So there's expansion of our own awareness. So if you're a scientist, and you may be the most skeptical person, but the sages of the past say, look, this is not like theoretical stuff. This is a knowledge. This is a way that you can have a direct connection so that you answer all those questions. And if you have that fundamental question asked, of the question of science, of your your awareness, which isn't there's not a verbal answer to the question of who we are. See, there's an experience of beingness, and it goes through multiple levels. You see, the ideal of a human incarnation, the ideal for us is that we would have an awareness of all the beautiful things that we can do in this world and act as normal human beings and be all involved in our work and so on and creative activity, and simultaneously have the word that's used in esoteric teaching is called antakarana. I don't know if that's pronounced right, but it's a way of saying there's a thread all the way from to the very atomic structure of your own being, you might say, into the essence of who we are, and it's a literal experience, it's a knowable experience, and that's what's called the ultimate knowledge. That's why some of these great gurus like Krishna would say, well, this is the supreme knowledge, the knowledge of all knowledges, the knowledge of consciousness, and it's an infinite knowledge, and it progresses throughout your lifetime, and according to the sages, even once upon a time, even the greatest beings in the universe, once upon a time, they may have gone through this body, and any great being can take a body. You see, this is the interesting thing about this body that we have. If you look in the mirror and you say, I got this little human body, well, all kinds of great sages and talents and geniuses have appeared in that body, and you have one, so, start working it, because there's dimensions of our own awareness that you can explore for a whole lifetime. I learned how to practice a meditation when I was back in 1972, and I didn't start really practicing much until 73. But I really got into it, and I would sometimes sit in a closet for a long time because I had nothing to do, and I didn't have a TV. You just sit there, and after a while, you come out like feeling drunk, like, oh my God, like this, I'm talking about 1973. And feeling just ecstatic bliss and joy from being inside. Now, along the way, before that, I had a lot of ideas about what kind of a cosmic experience I'm going to have, and I meditate and go do this and that. And what I've learned basically is not to have any concepts, and that is basically a progressive thing, that as you go on through life, you just subtly increase your perception. It's no different than training your physical senses, and you may be a little bit more perceptive about things around your house. For example, you might notice the subtle things in life. It's just a matter of being much more aware of subtle things as a practice of meditation. And there are many, many techniques that have been taught, but my personal preference is I practice teaching taught by a man named Prem Rawat, who's still out there teaching much, and incredible practice that I was taught. And the main thing I try to convey to people is, look, whatever way you choose, there's really only one way to go. You have to go from outside perception to inward perception, and it's a very easy process that even some children, and sometimes people accidentally fall into some blissful state or something. It's not an unusual, it's our nature, you see, to have a more full experience of being alive. Now, there's a book named by Patanjali called Yoga Sutra Patanjali. I reviewed that book, and it's one of my favorites. Light of the Soul. This is one translation of it, or one commentary, basically, and it has basically a lot of techniques and observations. But again, back to the thread, the science of connecting that thread of our awareness, because very, very simply put, meditation isn't really doing anything. It's more like undoing, because when we sit, we're born and we just come into this world. We come out of the womb and boom. I've looked at a lot of babies. I used to photograph babies for a while. I've done a few hundred of them and look in their little eyes, and you pick them up and you can just see kind of like, well, they're welcome to the world here. I don't know what I'm doing here, but at least so far it's fun. And this is how we come into the world. We just completely open and looking around, saying, then we get taught things. Our parents teach us stuff and so on, and we have these little layers, and if you ever seen like a paper mache creation, it's like every so often you pick another piece of paper from a newspaper and slap it on there, and slowly but surely this thing develops, and it's got this like strange shape. Sometimes there's personalities. Now, the whole idea is of a science of the soul, the science of being a human being, is to integrate all the different mechanisms in this body from top to bottom, from head to toe, to use all our functionality and our muscles and our intelligence and the subtle senses and the inner senses and the inspiration and all the different dimensions of our being. Use the feeling nature and the sound, or use music, use all the dance, use movements. Do everything we can in this life to just fully manifest that implicit, I like to call it like this cosmic ooze of life, you might say. It's like this slowly, just from the subtlest, like you might say the deep space of the quantum field. It's like hardly nothing's moving in there, and then it's just like energy is oozing into the universe, and it's making everything, stars and cells divide and atoms, things going on there, and it's just creating constantly. And this thing that nameless existence, the nameless being, they say that it's the one about nothing can be said, because the cosmic totality isn't something that you can really verbalize, you see. But what happens is, say, like, okay, if you touch one piece of gold, you know what all gold feels like, you see. So there are techniques of meditation that we get to touch that immortal substance. We get to feel, we get to notice that we're one with that universe. Basically, there's a thread that comes down, and the beauty about the life, I mean, they say that God has a sense of humor. I mean, he probably has a really good one. I mean, probably happy all the time, so I imagine they're probably laughing. I mean, most gods that a lot of times they talk about the sad gods, but I think it's probably the other way around. But anyway, the main thing is to connect there's a certain integrity, you see, about being aligned, you might say, in all our energy fields and all our interests, and having focus and having integrity in our actions. And there's so many different methodologies that are taught. It's all geared to just being a greater human being, you might say. And we're not going to be a greater human being if we don't augment our perception. Now, I've heard some interesting techniques that were used by some gurus, and this one technique I heard about was this guru, this devotee had gone, and his guru said he put two sticks like apart or some distance, whatever, and he said, now just look at those sticks until you can see both of them at the same time. You see, so it's sort of like integrating the duality. There's something symbolic and profound, because it trains the perception to be non-local, to be non-fixated on looking this way or looking this way, but to connect to a higher part of our being that is seeing more, you might say. And another technique I heard about was, the guru said, some guy came to him and said, well, teach me something. And so the guy says, okay, well, go, it's early morning, and go sit over there on the rock, sit over there and start listening to those rocks over there. Well, the rocks don't talk, but the guy was too polite to argue with the teacher, so he just went over there and sat there, and lo and behold, he sat there for a long time, and his senses of hearing got very, very subtle, and as the sun came up, the rocks warmed up, and he could hear them making little crackling sounds, and then little creatures stirring around there, and then he heard the little breeze. So it basically trained the person to augment their senses to the subtler and subtler and subtler, you see. And frankly, in the deepest state of vegetation, the people call it samadhi, there's a lot of words, but basically a steady mind, a steady point where the deepest experiences I've had are the simplest, where they're just profound silence and profound oneness, where there's no need to do anything, think anything. It's just enveloped in a sense of joyful bliss, you might say, and being conscious of that. And people have earplugs because they if you go enough in this world, you hear too many noises, and there's a lot of things you don't want to see either. So if people close their eyes or put things over their eyes, especially when you're in a plane or something, you don't want the light, and you want to hear those crying babies. So you cover your senses. And then there's people who practice sense deprivation. Some of these techniques people did, they went into a cave for a long time and they just said, okay, I'm not coming out until I'm in bliss. And then they got in bliss and they didn't come out. But the main point is to integrate ourselves and tune ourselves subtly, because there's so many distractions, and that's why an actual practice makes a big difference. If you have a science, you should practice it. Simple as it may be, the nice thing about this great science is the knowledge of all knowledge, as they call it. It's very easy to practice, and it's very beneficial, and so on. So the sages talk about the science. Again, the esoteric science is related to psychology, because it's all about the science of knowing who we are, what we are, and that we have, in the silence of our own being. In our lifetime, we talk and we socialize. We use our little identities. We use the word I and me and this and that. But ultimately, that's just sort of a drama that we go through, and we have to participate, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to participate in society and have this whole dance, because essentially everybody else is just like a part of us in our own being. It's sort of like there shouldn't be any reason to judge. And I want to finish this little video on that subject, because the sages say that we're always taught, don't judge other people. You see, when we look at another being, we have no idea what they're really conscious of. You see, just like you can look at some animals and you know that they smell things that we will never smell in our whole lifetime. They may be smelling something a mile away, but it's not our awareness, you see. When we look at other beings, other human beings, we don't know what they're conscious of. You see? And we don't want to be judged, because we know in our private consciousness we have realms of our own awareness and thinking and feeling that nobody else sees. This is the mystery, so when we see other people, if we put up like a frame, you might say, okay, everything I see about that person is a certain framed a certain way. If we don't want to be limited in our own personal growth and expansion as human beings, that we can overcome all kinds of things and develop, a lifetime of 80 years is an awful long time. You can learn an awful lot in 80 years. Same thing. We don't want others to judge us, so we shouldn't judge others. It's a very, very simple thing. I mean, I know many people have said this, okay, but and I'm certainly not adept at it perfectly by any means. But what I'm saying is that I found that by practicing those basic, simple things, if a non-judging, non-reacting, because essentially all consciousness comes from the same source. You see, it doesn't make sense to be destroying something that comes from the very source that we're from. You see, if we identify with what we really are as our real true nature, right away we just like, well, I don't want to harm anybody. Why would I want to harm anybody? Because I feel that kind of experience. Because I don't feel any separation. You see, and closing a little bit, another emphasis on the fact that this whole purpose, there's a lot of concepts about how people have to behave and act and dress and so on to be so-called spiritual. But that wouldn't make any sense, because then, okay, well then if there's one model for everything, then everybody should just be a robot and we all just do that, and that's the way it is. The same, cut them the right hair and the right dress and everything, and if it's all behavior, it's not like that. You see, if you look out into the universe and look around you, there's infinite, every leaf is different, snowflake's different, everything's different, people are different, dogs are different. The commonality is the beautiful thread that we have to hold on to, Because if it was all white that we all looked at, if heaven was just everywhere we look is just white, 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 boring, boring, boring. Nobody tells any jokes. It's just like even teeth. If that's what it's all like, I am going to go there. I don't want to go to a place that's all boring. I want to live in as a functioning being in the world and having that connection, that bridge all the way deep inside me, you see, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. I've been meditating all my life, and there's things I take for granted now in life that I don't, in the early stage of meditation, it was like, oh man, I gotta sit there for a long time. And now after a while, especially maybe if you get old, you get a little tired to say, okay, I'm just gonna go right there. I'm not gonna fight this anymore. I'm just gonna go and enjoy this, because it's really simple. It's not complicated. I had a lot of preconceptions, like many people in my life, about how I was supposed to behave. For a long time, I was a celibate monk, and I didn't dress funny, and I didn't shave my hair, but I was living a certain kind of a lifestyle that, made me concentrate on meditation. But that was a long time ago. Then I got married. A lot of stuff happened after that. But anyway, I want to talk more about esoteric psychology, because really, essentially, it is a science. It's not like, I don't know the modern depth psychology. I mean, I haven't practiced, and I've known people who were, very adept and experts in that field, but essentially, the esoteric teachings that the self, the capital self, is one, and it has become everything. So that infinite beingness, you might say, that provides the soil of life, the soil of being, the breath of life, everything that provides, for which everything comes and everything goes back, all whatever that is, that ultimate thing, it's a oneness, and we come from it and we go back to it. There's nothing apart from it, essentially. And when we realize that in a really practical way, there are people who've had near-death experiences, and they fly out of their body, and they realize, well, I'm not this body, at least, and then that liberates them. But it even goes beyond that, because there's a presence here. I mean, essentially, there's nowhere to go. I mean, there's not like I'm going to fly out of this body and I go flying over there or flying back over there. It's more like everything's present here, and there's nowhere to go. It's just everywhere is everywhere. So there are techniques that we can use and learn to practice to have those inner experiences for ourselves, so it's no longer a question of in our mind. That's what's called knowledge, not belief. Now, just in last closing here, I had a dream a long time ago that may illustrate a point here, that people have had these dreams falling and whatever. I had this dream, I can't remember how long ago it was, and I just fall and I just kind of let go. I had already meditated in my life at that time, so it must have been in my early 20s or something, and I just falling, and I felt like, well, am I going to hit something? And then I just passed right through, like air through a screen. It was kind of like that beingness that we are it permeates everything, you see. So the yogis in the meditative state, and they're sort of sensing a continuity between their own beingness and everything around them. It's kind of like fog, for example, or mist spreads out everywhere. There's a part of our being that we're not always conscious of that is like that is present in a bigger way than we might think, than it extends out from our body, you might say. But I appreciate people listening, and I'm just a 2 cents out here, putting my conversation out there, we're all one here basically. And honestly, part of the reason I make videos is to help people understand and gather ourselves together and get more conscious, because we can't afford to be separate from each other. And if we're all one, essentially, in one beingness, and we have the same objectives as human beings, that we shouldn't fight with each other, and we shouldn't judge each other, and there are people in the world, politicians mainly, and bankers. They love people separating. You know, lawyers. Oh yeah, man. They love. You know, they love people fighting because then they get to be on a side and make some money. So I just encourage people, don't be part of that. Let's not be the red and blue people. We're just being people here, and we're trying to understand what we're doing here. And we got a short time, so thanks for watching.